Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
This is Dr. John back with the latest episode of Surviving to Thriving, where you learn to grow through adversity. And I am extremely excited to have with me today Dr. Vic Strecher. And Vic is professor at the University of Michigan's Schools of Public Health and Medicine. He and his organizations have the organizations that he's founded have won numerous national and international awards, including 2 Smithsonian awards, the Health Evolution Partners Innovation in Healthcare Award. That's a really big plaque. And the National Business Coalition on Health's Mercury Award. Wow. So he's also got the Distinguished Innovator Award. He won the Thinker in Residence in Australia. It goes on and on and on. His 2009 TED Med presentation has been cited by MP Hotline as one of the top 10 TED Talks on public health. His latest neuroscience, behavioral, and epidemiologic research, and his 2 books, Life on Purpose and the graphic novel, which speaks to me, On Purpose, and his business Kumanu, are focused on the importance of developing and maintaining a strong purpose in life. And the way I came into contact with him, I happened upon his course on Coursera, which is called Finding Purpose and Meaning in Life. And he had over 30,000 students in that course. The other way that I found him was that he's got his app called Purposeful by Kumanu, which is offered for free right now, which is a screaming bargain. So go and check that out. And by way of that long welcome, let me say thank you and welcome, Vic. How are you?
Thank you so much, Dr. John. It's nice being here.
So let's get this kicked off with, how did you get into purpose? How did your purpose become purpose?
Yeah. Well, I'm a behavioral scientist, and I was interested in behavior because literally over half of disease and death is related to our lifestyles, how we live our lives. And so I became really interested in this area. And I help people quit smoking or manage their weight or manage their stress or get a mammogram or, whatever. And I was doing that kind of work. And then I was really interested in digital applications. Even when about 5% of people had access to the internet, I thought, whoa, this internet thing is going to may take off. And the Centers for Disease Control told me, well, people won't use the internet for their health, Vic. So what you're building are science fair projects, kind of. That's nice. Mm-hmm. I thought, whoa, wow, this is like the CDC is supposed to take my stuff and move it into the real world. And so I decided to build a company called Health Media. And that was in 1997. I built this company that was a digital health coaching company. And that did very well. In fact, we were Kaiser Permanente's Thrive campaign, the digital backbone for them.
Well done.
We ended up reaching over 55 million people. And the company, which was venture-backed, was sold to Johnson & Johnson. That was all nice. It was fine. It wasn't my goal. My goal was really to reach a lot of people with this kind of digital health coaching. But then I kind of had to decide, should I stay in the university? Should I build something? And I didn't really know what to build. And fairly soon after we sold the company, my daughter, Julia, who was one of the first heart transplant recipients, she had caught a chickenpox virus out of the blue when she was 6 months old. It attacked her. Usually you get chickenpox and you get a fever and a rash and it goes away in a few days, but this attacked her heart and it destroyed her heart. And so she became one of the early heart transplant recipients. And in 2010, she was a nursing student at the University of Michigan, and she very suddenly and unexpectedly died of a heart attack. And I was kind of searching around for things to do, but when she died, I kind of lost my purpose. My big purpose was to help give her a big life, my daughter, my partner, my wife, big lives, myself a big life. And when that happened, I kind of lost my purpose. And I found myself up in northern Michigan, where we live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we have this, we like to use our hand, as a way to describe the lower part of Michigan. And Lake Michigan, way up in the northern part, is absolutely gorgeous. And I found myself going through the grieving process up there by myself, while my wife, who's a gardener and she's an artist, a sculptor, she was doing that in Ann Arbor. But I woke up one morning at 5:15, and I had just had a really massive dream about my daughter being in it. And I woke up, and for some reason, I just felt the need. I looked out in Lake Michigan, which is usually like the Pacific Ocean. It's usually big and roiling. Instead, it was like glass, and it was so welcoming. It was still dark. It was still very almost totally dark. But I woke up and I hopped in my kayak, and I was in my boxers and t-shirt from sleeping. And that's probably too much information, but the idea was it's spring, and it was in the 40s. It was still cold as
dang.
Yeah, it was really cold. And I hopped in my kayak, and I just started paddling like crazy. And I was just like getting out there as far as I could. And I was a good 2 miles out when the sun came up, and the sun just popped up, and suddenly everything was shimmering around me. It was unbelievable. I didn't feel cold. I, in fact, felt warm. And I was thinking at that point in time, maybe I should just go and continue kayaking on to Wisconsin, which of course I never would have made. But I was just thinking, it's so smooth, it's so beautiful. I have nothing to live for really right now. It's just that I didn't care. It wasn't that I wanted to kill myself. I just didn't care. And I thought this would be a beautiful ride. Let's just go. And then the sun came up, and as a scientist, it's really hard to describe this, but I felt my daughter in me, and I felt my daughter speaking to me. And I felt my daughter saying, "You need to get over this, Dad." And it wasn't like, "You need to get over this." It was like, you need to get over yourself. You need to get over your ego, and you need to start living for other people and not focus so much on yourself and your own grief. And I realized I was at a crossroads right there in my life. I was 2 miles out on Lake Michigan, and in a puny kayak. And I had to decide whether to continue on, which I would have died, or to turn around. But if I turned around, I'd have to change my life. So I went back, and the first thing I did when I came back to shore, I started writing down, being a behavioral scientist, I started thinking, wow, what can I do? If I can't fix myself, like, what good am I as a behavioral scientist? And, I don't know if you ever feel that way, John, but I just was, boy, you better fix yourself here. And this is like the critical time of your entire life. So I just started by writing down the things that mattered most to me. And it turns out most of those things weren't things, they were people. So the people who mattered most were my family, of course, but also my students. So I thought, wow, my teaching matters at work more than anything else other than maybe my research. So I thought, I'm going to teach every student as if they're my own daughter, Julia. And so I called the university, who was so nice. They said, you can take off the next semester and the next semester. You just lost your daughter. That's like, one of the toughest things to do. And she was 19 years old. And, I was just in this state of really drinking myself to death, eating myself to death, watching whatever Kim Kardashian was on, which is a sure sign that you're getting ready to die.
Especially as a behavioral scientist.
By the way, I don't know Kim Kardashian. She's probably an awesome person. I'm just saying, I started watching things that made no sense to me.
Well, it does feel like chewing gum for the mind.
Yeah, good point. That's a great metaphor. It is and suddenly I just realized I'm going to start living for the things that matter most. And so I wrote down the things that mattered most to me. And I started saying, so I called the university and said, actually, I want to teach as soon as possible. And I'm going to teach every one of my students as if they're my daughter. And I might not, but it's an aspiration. And I realized that what I was doing was repurposing my life. Somebody had given me Viktor Frankl's famous Man's Search for Meaning as, when I was going through this grieving process. And it turned out to be the most important book I'd ever read. And he would say, woe to him who had lost his purpose. he was soon lost or she was soon lost. And I realized Viktor Frankl had gone through much harsher circumstances than I had, and many people do, and many people grow from these tragic events or difficult times. And I started reading, being in public health. I'm in the School of Public Health, as you said, and reading about the epidemiology, the research, looking at people with a strong purpose versus a weak purpose in life. People with a strong purpose live much longer. They are much less likely, 10 years later, half as likely to develop depression. Even their physiology is better. So they have more antibodies produced. They have fewer pro-inflammatory cells produced, which, by the way, we can talk about this later, come in handy in a pandemic.
Well, and I also wonder, I wonder about the telomeres too. I bet the telomeres are longer. So
we know that people with a strong purpose, in fact, there's a beautiful study done by people in your neighborhood, the University of California, San Francisco. Alyssa Epel is one of the world's stress.
The telomere effect. Yeah,
exactly. She and Elizabeth
beautiful work
wrote this great book. So Alyssa is a good friend, and she did this research where they took people out into Aspen and on a mountainside, took their whole lab out, and they put people into a loving kindness meditation for 3 months and compared them against a group that was waiting to get in, a waitlist control group, which in this case is a pretty good control group. And then what they found was the people who were in the loving kindness meditation were building a greater purpose, self-transcending purpose. And that purpose was directly related to an increase in telomerase, which is an enzyme, the fuel of our telomeres. And just to, edify that, telomeres are kind of like the plastic caps, the aglets on our shoelaces. They're, when they get shorter, and these are like on our chromosomes, the caps on our chromosomes, they keep our DNA under good repair. When they get shorter, we start getting sick and we die. People with a lot of stress in their lives their telomeres start shortening, and it's one of the early signs. And you can tell, you can look at identical twins later in life, and one might be all wrinkled up and the other one is, looks very healthy. And the healthy one has much longer telomeres.
Yeah. It's the concept of aging well.
It is aging. Yeah. So it's an aging biomarker, really. Mm-hmm. So it's so cool that people who are engaged in loving kindness meditation increase their purpose in their life, and the purpose in turn improved telomerase activation. Yeah. So,
well, and I got to say, if I can jump in there, loving kindness is one of my favorite forms of meditation, really? And I think Kristen Neff has some really good research on it as well.
It's so funny you say that. I was giving a loving kindness meditation to the employees at Coursera today. So they have 500 employees, and we did this loving kindness meditation. It was so cool. And last week, we, as part of my massive open online course through Coursera, this course about purpose and meaning, we did a worldwide loving kindness meditation with over 10,000 people.
Wow.
I felt like I was going to levitate. It was so interesting because you knew that people from every country on the planet was engaged in this loving kindness meditation. And it was really special. So I feel I'm very grateful for some of the things we've been able to do. And I guess here's one other thing, John. I hope that you don't mind me, I'm blabbing a lot.
Not at all.
One thing that I found, when I talk to audiences about quitting smoking or managing their weight or managing stress or something, that was fine. When I talk with audiences about purpose, I see tears well up in people's eyes. Yeah. I see a power because somehow I knew I'd hit a substrate in them, some sort of substrate that relates to the core of motivation, the core of behavior change, the core of happiness, the core of, living a big life. And I realized I just touched on something and I didn't even know it at first, but it was just the response of the audiences I was speaking to about this. I thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my career working on this.
Well, and I mean, if I think of every depressed person I've known in my life, every one of them lacked purpose. Yeah. And to what you're speaking about, I mean, it's one of the reasons I love dealing on the emotional level is because no matter what color or ethnicity or culture you come from in the world, we're all similar on that level of emotion. So we can all connect over
It's
similarities in
amazing.
emotions.
Yeah, in this Coursera course, it's just been out for 2 weeks, and we've already had, as you said, 30,000 enrolled,
which is incredible.
And so I'm getting LinkedIn, Facebook, emails from people from around the world saying, "You have just changed my life. You just touched me in a way that, I hadn't thought would, I didn't know I needed this until I took this class." So it is really special, and it's a free class. So, you can take it for free. If you like it, fine. If you don't, fine. But it's just really, really amazing to be reaching people at this deeper level.
Yeah. And thank you for your work in doing it. So let's get to brass tacks. And what is purpose?
Oh, wonderful question, actually. Let's say in general, it's a self-organizing life aim. So what that means is that once you start thinking about what matters most in your life, you're able to start living your life toward those things. What that automatically does is help you focus, helps you concentrate on the things that matter most and less on the things that don't matter so much. Mm-hmm. So, the Kim Kardashians of the world, I'm sure she's very nice, but I don't know her. Why should I follow what she's doing? Mm-hmm. What does that matter to me? All the social media in the world, why should I be following that all the time? All the noise. Should I be listening to the media with the COVID a minute, kind of media? No, because I have other things that matter a great deal in my life. So it helps you focus, and it helps you on the things that matter most and defocus on the things that don't matter most. So that, in that sense, it's self-organizing. But to even simplify it further, it's really a goal or set of goals around the things that matter most. So I apply the thing, we know that setting goals works much better than saying do your best. So if I'm trying to swim underwater as far as I can, or helping a person swim underwater as far as I can, I know that if I say, try to touch the other side of the pool, they may not make it, but they're going to swim much further if they try to touch the other side than if I say, swim as far as you can. So now let's elevate that to a life goal or set of life goals around the things that matter most, and say, let's set a goal around that. Like, I'm going to teach every student as if they're my own daughter is a goal that I've set, as opposed to I'm going to try to be a better teacher. Does that make sense? That's the difference between a purpose and a kind of, I'm going to try to be a good person. Huge difference.
And so to me, let me throw this out there and you can comment on the accuracy of it. It makes me think of Rick Snyder's work on hope. And so if, backing up from his work, I added values in front of that. And then backing up again, it seems like purpose can lead to values, can lead to goals, can lead to pathways, ways to get to those goals, and agency. And agency is the belief that we can get there, or the motivation.
I'm very much in line with that. I might myself switch it out to my values, what I care about, what matters most, leads to a purpose.
Okay.
It then leads to how am I going to become purposeful? So
I like your distinction between purpose and purposeful. So would you explain that?
Yeah, of course. First of all, it's hard to be purposeful if you don't have a purpose, right? So it's having a purpose may be a first step, or purpose is. I don't want to elevate it so high that, I could never change this. You change it every time you need a Hallmark card, So when you graduate, when you get married, if you get sick, if you lose your job, if you get a new job, when you retire, you may need new purposes, right? Mm-hmm. So think about purpose as being something flexible, like concentric rings in a tree. And then you start thinking, okay, now how do I become more purposeful every day? Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics once said, "One swallow does not a spring make." In other words, hey, there's a swallow, now it's spring, good, now I can go to Disney World, whatever. No, it's about doing something on a daily basis to live this bigger life. So one of the things that purpose motivates is behavior change. It motivates, and we literally have neuroscience to prove that. So when you start thinking about your purposeful core values, what you value in your life, and you start thinking about this purpose idea, then you start becoming less defensive and you go, wow, I need to quit smoking. Or wow, I need to manage my weight a little better. Man, I need more energy. How am I going to do that? I'm going to start sleeping better. I may need to take up meditation.
Can I pause you there? Because that's a huge phrase that you just used, less defensive. Because I mean, I've dealt with I did anger management for 10 years. And so with men,
it's so cool.
Well, thanks.
No, I saw it in your podcast. That is so awesome what you do.
Thank you. So, but to get to getting the information inside someone's head and their heart, you have to sneak around the defensiveness.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of using purpose and values to get there. And I want to get to, how do we discover our purpose? But I'm curious about one of the questions I've gotten in the past, which I don't have a clear answer to, is should values be aspirational or should they be in motion right now? Should they be present?
Yeah, great question. So I love the aspirational nature of purpose. So one of my purposes, for example, is similar to Viktor Frankl's purpose. He was once asked, and he said, I want to help the world become more purposeful. And I'd love to help 1 billion people find greater purpose and meaning in their lives. Now, it's very possible that I will die before that happens, but it is an aspiration. And maybe generations from now might look back and say, now there was a good ancestor. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, but I love the idea that we as a society can gain strength and meaning from, for example, COVID-19 or other tragic events, and learn from them. And not learn just for us, but learn for our offspring and their offspring and their offspring. So they look back and say, wow, they were great ancestors. That's how I like to think. And I think that's what a self-transcending purpose really deep down means.
Yeah, it sounds like post-traumatic growth, Tedeschi and Calhoun mixed with generational knowledge.
Well done. Yes, exactly. No, veterans who've come back.
No one out there listening is going to understand that, but yeah, for me and you.
As they've shown, veterans who have come back from the Gulf War, if they have purpose, they're far more likely to develop post-traumatic growth than if they have a low purpose. And people who've gone through earthquakes and tsunamis and loss of a loved one and cancer, and I could go on, who can gain meaning from those things, who can find a new purpose in their life, they become deeper, richer souls who can help other people because they've gone through things.
Well, let me pause you there. For those listening, the biggest question you can ask yourself after going through adversity or challenge or trauma is, what am I supposed to learn from this? And that's one of the things I believe in that research, that's where you really want to put your emphasis. Yeah. And it might take some time, right? I mean, like even for you with your daughter, there's a grieving process that has to happen. Yeah. And then when you're able to pick yourself back up and look at it with a little bit of distance, that's when I think you insert the question of, like, what am I supposed to learn in this shelter in place 2-month lockdown that we've been in?
If I think about an alcoholic or an addict or somebody who has been at rock bottom, I mean, so close to death, it's not even funny. And then they somehow get back up and then they learn from that. And then they say, I want to help other people. There's probably no better counselor on the planet that is, than a person who's gone through those things and then has learned, especially if they're maintaining an open mind and not just saying, oh, I have the one way to do this. You want these people to say, well, I've learned a lot from my own experience. I've also learned from other people's experience. Yeah. Those people are amazing counselors.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I tell my clients that are in the midst of dealing with an addiction. The other thing that comes to mind, though, is, one of my biases, and this comes from positive psychology, is that I think that every one of the 7.5 billion people on this planet are all pursuing happiness at some level. Now, I think we go about it using different paths or different doorways into the same room. And I think some paths are more likely to get you there than others. So, if you're pursuing wealth as a value or fame or power, those aren't going to get you there, in my opinion. They can get you close. They can get you hedonism. They can get you.
You're never going to be satiated.
Right. There's never enough. Someone's always got more. Yeah. And those things, those bodily or sensual pleasures that you get from money and power and fame, they only last as long as you're engaging in them. And
Aristotle talked about it, in fact.
Yeah.
He called it hedonic pleasure versus eudaimonic happiness. Right. Eudaimonic is being in touch with your inner daemon, this true self, true God you have inside you. And that's kind of like a transcending approach to your life. And he said, it's okay. We all have both hedonic and eudaimonic desires. He said, that's fine. But if all we have are hedonic desires, we're like, and he used this term in Nicomachean Ethics, he said, then we're like grazing animals.
Yeah. And I think, the way I think of in my simple mind, hedonism or hedonic pleasure, I think of it as sex, drugs, rock and roll.
Sure. Right. Absolutely.
And yeah, I think there's got to be more to it. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, what values do you see that are purposeful or effective paths to happiness? Like, and the one that I keep coming back to is serving others in some way. Because even if you had a value of like lifelong learning, then I would push to, okay, well, what's the learning about? What are you using the learning for instance?
Right. What a great question and observation you've made. I was interviewed by Martha Stewart magazine, of all places, in last Christmas. And they said, this is an article about happiness. So tell me, what makes people happy? I said, dumb question. I hate to tell you, but this is a really bad question. And it's going to be a bad article if you just say what makes you happy, because that's the wrong starting point. To me, if you're just focused on being happy, you will not be happy typically.
Right.
What I believe personally makes people happy, and there's really good science to show this too. If you have a self-transcending purpose, it's pretty much what you said. If you have a self-transcending purpose and you become purposeful and you're engaged in that, then happiness becomes a side effect of that. But if you focus on pure happiness, especially through material, and by the way, we all like to graze. We're all grazing animals.
Yeah, and I'm good with material to a point.
Yeah,
it's not going to make you. Yeah,
good wine, good sex. Yeah. We like good cars, whatever. We like to have nice vacations. We all love those things. That's great. But if we can balance it out with, this kind of eudaimonic purpose, there's actually research now that's shown that people who are more eudaimonically well have greater antibodies produced. They have more type 1 interferon produced. These are all part of an immune function system that's really good for you, and less pro-inflammatory cells, less cytokines produced, which is like really bad for you in a plague.
Well, and it's interesting, when you were talking, I was thinking about, so I went through a really contentious divorce, 2010 to 2013. Yeah. Thank you. And I was depressed. After you lost your daughter, I was in a similar place. Like, I was just like, I felt like a failure as a father, a husband, a partner, a dad. And it was interesting because even through that dark period of my life, I could still pull myself to work. And working with my clients was really the shining light that pulled me through that wreckage.
Wow,
because I see my work as very meaningful. And so even to get to work and deal with clients on a day-to-day basis, I still felt pride. I felt good about myself. I felt like I was contributing. And so it's interesting the way that it buoyed me through that darkness.
How are you doing now?
Oh, fantastic. I'm engaged to a therapist now, actually.
Oh, okay. All right. Great.
So yeah, it's been, my life's never been better. So I like to say I'm happily divorced at this point.
Sure. Good. Well, it's nice that you've been able to make it out of that darkness.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's get to, let's say I want to discover my purpose. How do I go about starting?
Yeah.
What are some exercises?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, there's one exercise that I really love, and you and I talked about it just briefly before this, about maybe writing out your epitaph. What would you want on your headstone? And this headstone test that is in psychology, they call it mortality salience. And in my classes, I love to say, okay, now the Grim Reaper just walked in the classroom. I want you to pull out a sheet of paper and draw a headstone of your choice, whatever shape, size you want. And you just died today. And what would you want on your headstone? What would you want people to say about you at your memorial service? And then what we typically do is paste these up on the wall, and we walk through this metaphorical cemetery, and we have people who are by their own headstone saying, here's why I wrote what I did, and other people being able to observe that. Why did you write that? And let's go through that cemetery and learn more. I think it's thinking about the fact that we will die. And I know that sounds ridiculous to a lot of people who are listening to this idea of, wow, I don't want to even think about dying. Well, it's a Buddhist tradition to start thinking about your death. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, if we would only think about our deaths once a day, we'd have a more peaceful world. So the thought of mortality salience is basically saying, I'm not going to live forever. The fact that I'm going to live fairly in this very brief period of time over these, 13.2 billion years the universe has existed, and however after that, we're here for this brief period of time. What are we going to do? Are we going to sit around and waste our time, drinking too much or shooting drugs or whatever we're going to do, or being mean to people, being hateful to people? Or are we really going to do something beneficial? And so that's what mortality salience does. So that's a great first step. Another good first step, and this will sound really weird, I like to have people just open their smartphone and what's on your smartphone? What's on the wallpaper? And it's amazing. People, I'll say, who has their children? Ton of hands go up. Who has their spouse? More hands. Who has a family member? More hands. Who has a work of art? A lot of hands. How about a work of nature? How about their dog? A lot of dogs. Any cat people out there? Horse people, whatever. You're starting to think more about the things that might matter a lot to you. That's all I want. I want that salience. It's so funny in my, I read the reviews of students who are going through my massive open online course. And this one student gave me like 1 star and said, he trivialized this by having people look on their smartphones to see what their purpose is. How ridiculous is that? And, I thought, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make this like a nice, easy, simple start for people.
No, I thought that was a great start. I loved it because it makes it accessible. And a lot of times this idea of purpose is it's ambiguous and people can't, it's not concrete enough. You can't touch it.
Right.
And so I think that exercise is great at pointing out that one of the things that's so valuable to us is our relationships. And I remember reading about that in positive psychology years ago. And I was like, shit. It really didn't speak to the curmudgeon in me. I was like, I'm an introvert. I'd rather, I'm like, oh man, I got to go out and be social. But it's huge. I mean, you don't laugh, you don't smile by yourself much at all, if it ever.
No, starting with what matters most and finding out what your legacy might be. That's another question. Another question might be, what causes do you care about? That's the beginning of an awesome purpose that you might have. What are you grateful for? Another one. What gets you out of bed? That's another one. So, we could go on, but those kind of questions to begin asking, those are things that set the stage for then saying, okay, now that I have a pretty good fix on what matters most and what doesn't matter all that much. I'll give you an example at work. I have a million different things I have to do as a professor. What are the things that matter most? And I talked to Adam Grant about this once. And, Adam Grant, Give and Take, awesome guy and graduate of the University of Michigan. And he said, the things that don't matter, I have to prioritize because I'm so busy now with speaking and writing and everything else. I have to prioritize. So I prioritize my students and my research. And I thought, what an awesome thing to think. So you may prioritize the countless committee meetings that you have to be in. And it's not to say committee meetings aren't important, but I am not going to sit around complaining about my parking spot in a committee meeting. I just could give a shit. I really don't care anymore because I've tried to remove the extraneous whiny things that I hear. Someone once said academics are petty because the stakes are so low. I would just say that as the stakes are lower, you become more and more petty. Yeah. So I just want to say, as an academic, there are things that are incredibly important for society that we do. We're in this blessed position that we should be grateful for every day, in my opinion.
Well, and I want to jump in there because one of and I want you to put out your purpose as well before we get off this interview, but God, there's so many places to go. But one of the things that is part of your passion it seems, or my understanding is that it's taking kind of the complexity of academia and research and boiling it down to a level that the vast majority of us can make sense of. And that's something that struck me when I was at UC Berkeley, that, there's so much good research and good studies and good tools, but no one can access it because it's written in the nomenclature that kind of hides it from the public.
You mean you can't get into reciprocal determinism?
Well, only if it takes me about 20 minutes or so. It slows me down quite a bit.
Why we have to call confidence self-efficacy and, I mean, what is self-regulatory behavior?
Or capitalization is really just getting excited about your partner's good news.
You could go on and on about this. I have felt, and I guess I've felt this way because maybe I'm not that smart myself. I mean, I would sit in these classes and go, I'm not getting all this. And yet it seems pretty straightforward. Why can't somebody explain this to me in a pretty straightforward way? Anyway.
That's the shared purpose.
Thank you very much for saying that. My wife says that about me, that I guess if I have a gift, it's being able to take complex things and turn it into something that's pretty straightforward for people.
I think it's a huge skill, and it's a big compliment. So
thank you very much. That's a goal of my life. Yeah.
And so do me a favor and share your purpose, because I think, again, bringing it down to the concrete and having an example is really helpful.
Yeah, sure. And it really does start with the things that matter most. So it's to be an engaged husband, because that matters a lot. My wife matters a lot. Father, my child now, who's awesome. She's 34 years old, and she directs storytelling at the National Geographic. She runs around the world and gives out millions of dollars each year to awesome storytellers, whether they're shaman or photojournalists. She goes all over and it's like the best job. Yeah. So anyway, to be an engaged husband, father, grandfather now, and son. To teach every one of my students as if they're my daughter, Julia, to basically to get people out on the dance floor, to bring people out from being wallflowers, metaphorically. And that doesn't mean I'm an introvert, now I'm an extrovert. What it means is starting to live a big life, actually dancing metaphorically in your life, as opposed to sitting by the wall, hoping that someone asks you to dance, or saying, oh, this is bad music. Go out there and effing dance, and get into that music. Whatever kind of music you are in, try to get out there. In other words, I want to help people become more purposeful and have more meaningful lives and be more engaged in their lives. Have this.
I love, if I can jump in there, I love that piece about to help get people out on the dance floor, both in real life and metaphorically.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
And I do, actually, in real life, I do too, because I love dancing, and I'm always the first one. My wife has this big street fair that she runs in Ann Arbor, and they always have music, and everyone's like sitting out there not doing anything. And I go out there and I start dancing, and suddenly I'll pull a couple of kids out, and they're dancing, especially.
So, can I ask you a question? Sorry to interrupt. To what extent do you think we have to learn to overcome our own sense of embarrassment to live a full life?
God, thank you for that question. That is so cool, because it is like dancing, isn't it? It's like, if you stop worrying, if your ego can just sit on the side and you go, I could give an F. I really could care less what people think about me.
Yep.
I care a lot about what I take I don't take myself seriously, but I take what I do very seriously. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what people think about me. And imagine, everyone from the person who invented the wheel in ancient Babylon, people probably said, oh, he's lazy or she's lazy. What are they doing inventing a wheel? We need this sledge, to drag. And, people who were creative, who were innovators, had to stop caring about what other people thought of them. Researchers, I think, really good researchers, have to stop caring about what other people think. They have to start, Carl Jung said, I have to follow my inner daemon, this true self inside of me, after Sigmund Freud had rejected him and said, oh, you don't believe in my Freudian analysis? Well, screw you. Well, he said, I had to follow my inner daemon. I think that's really special, that you have to follow this, thing that you've created inside of yourself, hopefully after being well educated about life, not necessarily having a PhD, but being educated about life, understanding the joys and the sorrows of the world. Is that making sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's part of it's embarrassment. Part of it's how we're socialized, that, you're kind of socialized to go with the crowd. Because I talk a lot about the man box culture. And I think there's that big piece of embarrassment and humiliation where we police each other as men, so that if we step outside of the man box, you're immediately insulted generally. And then you jump back in the man box.
I love that metaphor of man box. Unpack that just a little bit.
Well, it's actually not mine. It's Paul Kibble's. He did work in Oakland, California, I think in the 80s, where he went and asked a bunch of high school young men and young men in middle school, what does it mean to be a man? And found there was remarkable similarity in their answers. It was be invincible, be invulnerable, don't ask for directions, be dominant, be aggressive, know everything, right. Don't feel, all that stuff that we kind of
try to solve everyone's problem.
Osmosis. Yeah. And then the other part of it is, if we step outside of the man box and we show too much emotion, we get hammered. So if we show too much sadness or fear, someone will say something like, don't be such a pussy, don't be a little girl, don't be a bitch. And forgive my language, but that's what we get. And interestingly, all those three insults are the essence of femininity. So that when you get them, not only are we shamed, and the message is don't be feminine, don't tap into those feminine qualities in yourself, lock those away. Mm-hmm. Also, little girls hear those insults, and so they understand implicitly that they are less than for being feminine.
Devastating for them.
And then the other side of it is, if you show too much joy, excitement, romanticism, love, someone will say, don't be gay, don't be a fag. And so we jump back in the man box and we're left with three things that we can publicly display without fear of humiliation: stress, lust, and anger. And the big one is anger.
Do you think that someday we'll get out of this idea that there's only a penis and vagina that defines,
I think we're heading that way with the
that we can really
raise between gender.
Yeah.
I think we're heading that direction. We're just starting to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting future. And it's not a future I was brought up in. I'm 64, so I was brought up in the, you're gay or you're a fag or whatever. And if you showed, like, I used to take cooking class in high school, and I took a typing class, and people thought I was, gay probably. And some people told me, yeah, you're gay. I frankly took them because they're all women in the class, all girls. So I thought this is the best. But it's just funny how people were so brutal during that time. If you were interested in something. And now, by the way, I just made 3 awesome pizza doughs from Serious Eats recipe, and I plan to make some great pizza tonight. And
good for you.
My cooking skills and my typing skills are better than most people because of those classes.
And useful skills to have, too, I might add.
Come on. Yeah.
But it's funny, I think we needed to have, you talk about following your own inner daemon, and I think we needed that even at a young age to explore those parts of ourselves that society or malehood wouldn't approve of. I mean, like I was, I mentioned before, I was a big comic book geek. I was a big Dungeons and Dragons geek.
Oh, really?
There was a lot of geeky parts to me that I would kind of hide, and I could also be an athlete and a student. So, I was passable.
Yeah.
But if that's all you're into, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it's sad. It sounds like we're moving the conversation from purpose into, what it's like to be a man.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go there.
No, but what I'm thinking is that they're so connected. There's part of this that relates to agency, that we, Kurt Vonnegut once said, we are who we choose to be, so we should be careful who we choose to be. It's a facetious way of saying we have agency, by the way, so be careful.
Use it.
I think it's a great way to think about it. We can be whoever we want to be nowadays. And I know some people listening to this will go, well, we can't be rich or whatever. And I get that. But, I have a good friend, James Aranetwe, who is the founder of Teach for Uganda. He was an AIDS orphan. I used to do a lot of work in Africa on AIDS prevention. And in the 80s, when it had just come out, and James said, you people in the West don't understand. You think that purpose is just at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, but it's not. Purpose purpose gives hope for the poor. Without purpose, we would die. And so it's really quite universal, because it also makes you feel, okay, now I have hope. And you had mentioned that before. And then you start thinking, I have agency too. I have a choice, and I need to make the right choices. No one else is going to like hold my hand through life. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't happen. You have, when my daughter died, there wasn't anyone who could actually get me out of this. I had to get myself out of it. Now, I had a really supportive environment to do that. It takes both. It takes this ecological approach. But, ultimately it does come to you, and you have to make these decisions.
It's interesting just looking at those situations that we were both in where you're really depressed. I often think of it from an emotional place, that you have to go from sadness to anger to some degree to get out of there. I mean, at some point you're just like, fuck it. I'm tired of wallowing in my own shit. I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I'm going to stop this and move forward. And I think that takes a little bit of anger, because anger has some energy. It has some momentum. It has some activation to it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You certainly see that. And that's part of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And I think those stages of grief can be applied to so many different parts of life. I think a lot of people went through that and are going through it with what we're going through right now with COVID.
Well, I think we are grieving right now, as a world, a planet. But I have a problem with the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, because that research was done on people that were facing their own deaths.
Yeah.
And then it was taken by other therapists and too widely applied.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some truth to it, but I think it's misused.
Yeah. But if you think about something like, the semi-plague that we're in, you might say, okay, early on, there's denial phase. Like this
that was definitely true. Yeah.
It's just going to stay in, in China. And then it moves into gradually through anger. We're really pissed off at, every person who should have done something faster. And that's hard to do. It's hard to think if we're just going to be pissed all the time, rather than trying to come through this and ask a couple of questions. Like, ask yourself 6 months from now or a year from now, will you be able to look back at yourself and say, I now learned about some values that I didn't have before. I learned that I had some strengths that I didn't know I had before. I'm on a different path now in my life at work and in my life with my relationships that I didn't have before. If we can do that, then we will have grown from this experience. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to be thinking about. Can we get through this with grace? And
I think one of the biggest lessons we can pull from this is an understanding of our own resiliency.
Exactly.
And that's powerful knowledge to have. I remember I had a client, for some reason I have themes in my private practice. And there was a point many years ago where I had like 3 or 4 teenagers that all of whom had lost their mother at a tragically young age. And so I was working with this 14-year-old, and he had lost his mother to breast cancer. And I had known him for a pretty good amount of time. And I started pushing him on this post-traumatic growth idea of, what are you supposed to learn from this? I understand this is tragic and the pain's never going to really go away. And what's the lesson here? And, he kind of like, well, I don't know. Yeah. And I said, well, here's the lesson that I would take away from this if I were you. And it's, if that didn't kill me, if I survived that, nothing can destroy me psychologically. Now, it's not 100% true, but it is a very powerful belief to tuck in your back pocket.
So Nietzschean, that which doesn't kill me,
make you stronger. Yeah.
Stronger. And
I think there's truth to it.
I really believe there is truth to it. Ultimately, you have a choice to make. That's a very Stoic philosophy, by the way. Yeah. The Stoics felt that no matter what situation, there are a number of Stoic philosophers who were actually slaves. There are people who were in very difficult circumstances and that horrible things happened to them. And they believed that it was their choice to react the way, they had agency. No matter whatever's in my mind, I can choose to have in my mind. And that to me is a very powerful idea. And so whatever I choose to be, whoever I choose to value, whatever I choose to value and build a purpose around that, that's my choice. And that's like that aspect of human freedom. That's the joy of life to me. And I really do not want to discount the environment, discount society, discount our politics, discount things that make people poor and continue to make people poor or disenfranchised or sick. I'm in public health, and I get that, and I've lived that, and I've done work in that. But I do believe that it's both. And, maybe I'm spending too much time right now talking about what the individual can do, where we really should be talking about building an environment that allows the individual to make these choices. And I'm totally get that, and I'm sympathetic to that. But as an individual, what can we do? The person listening to this podcast, what can we do? Can we start thinking more purposefully and thinking about a self-transcending purpose that helps other people?
Well, and I think to the extent more of us get to that self-transcendent value or purpose, the better the environment gets.
Yep.
Because I do believe
determinism.
Yeah, that would, damn. Oh, well, Vic, I got to wrap this up because I'm aware of time. I've absolutely loved this conversation. So thank you so much.
Back at you.
And before we wrap up, tell people where they can get a hold of you. Tell them about the book again. Tell them about the app, please.
Yeah, sure. Maybe the easiest way right now to reach me, or what I'm talking about, if you want to have this unpacked quite a bit more, is to go to Coursera, Coursera.org, and you can get this free class on finding purpose and meaning. And just look up my name, Vic Strecher, or you can just look up Finding Purpose and Meaning, and you can glom onto the class. At least for now, we're offering this app that I built called Purposeful for free. So, and by the way, if you use Purposeful, we're not selling or sharing your individual data with anyone. This is not an ad-driven model. It really is designed to help you become more purposeful and live a bigger life. That's what we're about. So I'll unpack a lot of these concepts in that class. Maybe that's the best way to reach what I do.
Yeah, and I've looked through the first couple of weeks of that class, and it is absolutely outstanding.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Very well done. So thank you very much for joining me, Vic. I really appreciate it. Really nice to meet you face to face. And that does it for this session of Surviving to Thriving, where you learn to grow through adversity. Thank you so much for listening. And be sure to check out my weekly podcast, The Evolved Caveman. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.